Welcome to the Wealth Wisdom, where knowledge becomes power and power builds your future.
Imagine waking up one morning to discover that every dollar in your bank account, every loan you've ever taken, every mortgage payment you've ever made, was part of a system designed not to help you progress but to quietly extract wealth from you endlessly, predictably, and mathematically guaranteed. A system so embedded into society that even governments can't escape it. Most people think debt is simply a burden, a temporary inconvenience, something you just have to pay off. But what if that's only the surface? What if debt is actually the engine, an invisible machine used to manufacture wealth out of nothing? And what if the people who designed this machine knew exactly what they were doing? Because here's the part no one ever tells you. Debt isn't just a financial tool. It's a business model, a renewable resource, a perpetual motion machine that never stops producing profit for the people who sit at the top of the financial pyramid. And once you understand how this system works, where it came from, who engineered it, how it spread across the world, you'll never look at money the same way again. But this story doesn't start with Wall Street bankers or modern governments drowning in national debt. It starts centuries earlier, with a small group of people who were asking a very simple question. How can we multiply wealth without physically creating anything? That question became the spark that would ignite one of the most powerful systems in human history, one that still controls the fate of nations today. To understand how debt became a tool for endless wealth, you have to go back to the moment money itself stopped being a physical object and became an idea, something that could exist, even if it wasn't actually there. For most of human history, money was real, tangible, something with intrinsic value: gold, silver, land, livestock. If you didn't have resources, you couldn't participate in the economy. If you had them, you were wealthy, simple. But around the Middle Ages, a fundamental shift began. Merchants needed to transport wealth across long distances, dangerous journeys filled with thieves. So instead of carrying gold, they started using paper receipts that represented gold stored in a vault. These receipts were easier, safer, and more convenient. But here's the twist. The people issuing those receipts eventually realized something shocking. Most holders of receipts would never come to claim the actual gold, and that single realization quietly opened the door to the concept of creating more money than actually existed. Imagine you have 100 gold coins in your vault, but you print 200 paper receipts. You lend out these extra receipts, charge interest, and no one notices because the system still functions, as long as people trust it. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking, the foundation of the modern financial world, and it completely changed the relationship between debt and wealth. At first, this practice was risky. If too many people demanded their gold back at once, the whole illusion collapsed. But over time, with government backing, legal protection, and growing economic complexity, the system became more stable and far more powerful. The receipts evolved into banknotes. Banknotes evolved into currency. And eventually, the vault didn't need gold at all, because the system had become self-referential. Money was no longer something you held. It was something that was created and circulated on confidence alone. This is where the early Bankers realized the genius saw the danger of what they had built. They discovered that debt wasn't just a liability. It was an asset, a source of profit, a stream of cash flow that could be multiplied as long as people believed the system was legitimate. This single insight transformed banks from mere vault keepers into creators of wealth. But the rise of this system wasn't smooth. It faced resistance, political battles, wars, collapses, and revolutions. Every time the system broke, it came back stronger, more sophisticated, more deeply integrated into society, like a virus that mutates to survive. Fast forward to the late 17th century. Wars were expensive. Nations needed money far more than they had in physical gold. So governments began borrowing from banks, creating national debt. The government would issue bonds, banks would buy them, and in return the government would pay interest. Citizens would pay taxes to fund that interest. Suddenly, the population wasn't funding the government's costs. Directly they were funding the government's debt, which enriched the bankers who provided the loans. Debt had become nationalized. The next leap came in 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve System in the United States. For the first time, a central bank had the legal authority to create money through government bonds. In other words, the government borrows money from the central bank, and the central bank creates that money out of nothing. The government then owes interest on this newly created money. Let that sink in. Money is created as debt, and the debt automatically generates more money for the issuers.
But the real turning point, the moment when the system achieved total freedom from physical limits, happened in 1971. The gold standard, what little remained of it, was abolished. Money no longer had to be backed by gold. It didn't have to be backed by anything. It could simply be printed, or typed, or created with a keystroke. And once the final anchor was removed, the debt wealth machine went into overdrive. Governments could borrow without limit. Banks could lend without restraint. Consumers could buy without savings. Credit cards exploded. Mortgages became normalized. Student loans ballooned. Corporations borrowed to buy their own stock. Countries borrowed to pay for the interest on previous borrowing. A new kind of economy emerged, one that wasn't fueled by productivity, but by debt. But here's the critical part. For the people controlling the system, debt isn't a problem. It's the product, the goal. Because interest, the price of borrowing, turns every loan into a profit-generating asset. And as long as debt keeps growing, the profits keep flowing. Think about this. If you lend $1 million at 5% interest, you earn $50,000 that year. But if you lend $100 million, you earn $5 million. And if the entire global economy is forced to borrow trillions every year just to function, the interest payments become massive, predictable streams of wealth. Debt becomes renewable, endless, perpetual, but every machine has a breaking point. And this one is no exception. As households, businesses, and governments piled up more and more debt, something strange started happening. Productivity growth slowed, wages stagnated, wealth inequality exploded. Yet asset prices, stocks, real estate, commodities surged, not because they were inherently more valuable, but because cheap debt was constantly flowing into them. Debt inflated everything except the actual standard of living. Then came the crises, each one exposing cracks, each one requiring bigger and bigger interventions. The Great Depression, the 1970s stagflation, the 1987 crash, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the dot-com bubble, the 2008 mortgage collapse. Every crisis had the same pattern. Excessive debt leads to instability. Instability leads to collapse. Collapse leads to government and central bank rescue. Rescue requires creating even more debt, and each time the solution becomes the next problem. By the early 21st century, the world had crossed into a new reality, an economy that mathematically cannot function without continuously increasing debt, not stable debt, increasing debt, because without expansion, the machine stops. And if the machine stops, the entire system seizes. Governments fear recessions because recessions reduce borrowing. Banks fear regulation because regulation reduces lending. Corporations fear higher interest rates because higher interest rates make debt expensive. Consumers fear losing jobs because they need wages to pay their loans. Everyone at every level is tied into the same cycle. But the question nobody asks is, who benefits the most from a world drowning in debt? The answer becomes obvious when you look at the numbers. The global debt market, government, corporate, and personal, has reached hundreds of trillions. More than 3 times the value of all goods and services produced annually. And the interest on that debt, it feeds the financial institutions, investment firms, asset managers, and central banks that issue, buy, and control it. Debt has become the world's most profitable commodity. But here's the part that shocks most people. Governments don't actually try to eliminate debt. They manage it. They roll it over. They borrow to pay old borrowing, because if global debt started shrinking, even slowly, the entire financial system would deflate like a punctured balloon. Banks wouldn't earn interest. Investments would dry up. Asset prices would fall. Economies would collapse. This is why, no matter how many austerity plans or fiscal reforms governments announce, the total debt keeps rising. It has to. The system demands it. This is also why political promises about paying off the national debt are fantasies. Not because politicians are dishonest, though many are, but because the structure of modern money makes repayment practically impossible. If the government paid back all its debt, the money supply would shrink dramatically, causing a massive economic depression. The system is designed to keep the debt alive.
And the people who oversee it understand this better than anyone. Central banks don't try to reduce debt. They try to control the cost of debt interest rates. Because lowering rates encourages more borrowing, and more borrowing grows the system. Every time the economy slows, central banks cut rates. Every time businesses struggle, governments offer stimulus packages funded by debt. Every time a crisis erupts, more money is created, more credit is issued, more loans are offered, more bonds are sold. It's predictable. It's engineered. It's the only playbook the system has left. But as the machine grows, the contradictions grow with it. We now live in a world where the average person takes on debt just to survive housing, education, transportation, health care, where governments owe more money than they can ever repay, where corporations borrow billions not to innovate, but to manipulate their own stock prices, where the financial markets are artificially inflated by constant injections of debt-generated liquidity. We live in a world where money is no longer a measure of value, but a measure of obligation. And here's the most unsettling part. The system doesn't need you to understand it. It only needs you to participate in it, to borrow, to spend, to pay interest, to keep the machine running. But systems built on ever-expanding debt don't last forever. History shows what happens when the weight becomes too great. Ancient Rome debased its currency to pay debts and collapsed. The Weimar Republic printed money endlessly and fell into chaos. Argentina defaulted repeatedly. Modern countries now sit on the same path, only larger, more interconnected, and more difficult to unwind. Still, the machine keeps running because there's no alternative that governments, corporations, or banks are willing to accept. A reset would be devastating, a collapse even worse. So the system keeps kicking the can down the road, hoping the breaking point can be delayed just a little longer. And yet, if you look closely, the patterns are repeating. Debt rising faster than income, asset prices decoupling from reality, governments borrowing to pay interest, central banks forced to choose between inflation and recession, both bad, both unavoidable. The cycle is tightening, which brings us to the present moment. A global economy dependent on debt, yet increasingly unable to service it. A system that demands infinite growth in a world with finite resources. A financial structure that asks one impossible question: how long can this continue? That question has no easy answer, but one thing is clear. Understanding the system is the first step in protecting yourself from it. 3 key takeaways. First, debt is not just a financial tool, it is the foundation of the modern economic system. It fuels everything around you, from government spending to corporate profits to the prices of everyday goods. Once you recognize the mechanics, the chaos starts to look disturbingly organized. Second, the system benefits those who own debt, not those who owe it. Borrowers struggle. Lenders win. If you want to escape the trap, you must shift from being a consumer of debt to being an owner of assets that debt flows into. Third, the machine will continue running until it physically can't. And when that moment arrives, the world will face a choice: restructure the system or rebuild it entirely. That transition will not be smooth, but those who understand what's happening today will be the ones who adapt tomorrow. So before you click away, before you go back into the world shaped by this invisible machine, ask yourself one final question. Are you swimming in the current of the system, or learning how the system itself moves? If you want more videos that break down the hidden mechanics of global power, finance, and human behavior, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone who still thinks debt is just a personal problem. Because the truth is far bigger and far stranger than most people ever realize. Let's keep digging. The world is built on secrets, and together we're going to uncover them.